Morning and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Lynchburg. We're glad you're here today. We gather in a spirit of freedom and friendship each Sunday morning, and in all the other groups and combinations of members and friends. Whoever you are, whatever your beliefs, whatever your age, and whomever you love, you are welcome here. As we work together for justice, compassion, and peace, we are aware that our buildings sit on land originally part of the Monacan Nation. I'm Terry Bailiff. I'm the professional minister of this congregation, but I share the ministry with all our members and friends. If you'd like to receive our monthly newsletter and Friday e-news updates, then I invite you to either fill out the virtual visitor card on our website, or there should be a visitor card in the packet of the seat in front of you, and you can just put that in the offering basket when it goes by. You may also want to join our Facebook group. This morning, goodness me, I typed off the wrong things. Our young adult group is meeting this Tuesday at 7 p.m. in Unitarian House, which is the house facing Court Street. And you're all welcome. If you have some questions, you can ask me about that after the service. I'd also like to I need a breather right here. Oh, goodness. I typed off the wrong service. But anyway, we'll be fine. You've got yours.
Yeah. Is this the one that you need?
No, not right now. We're go with the flow. I want to say what?
Caleb's mic is not on. I can hear him, but it's not on.
Is it on now?
Still now.
Okay. It was working just a minute ago. You know, this is happening because we were here and went through the service and practiced, and everything went perfectly.
No, it should work.
Okay, it's working now.
You use it about this close.
Yeah.
Or when you get to talk, you can take your mask off.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. So I also want to thank Brianna and Frank for creating this beautiful aesthetic environment here this morning. And Caleb and I are trying out something new. So experimentation is always a good thing. So now I'd like to invite us to just ground ourselves, take a few deep breaths, acknowledging the rain outside that nurtures Mother Earth, and giving thanks for this day and this community. I love services like this. Oh, good, there was sand in the lighter. As we light our chalice and begin our service, we share these words. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, O Spirit of life. Now we're on track. I know, I've got to get a grip. So our opening words this morning are from one of our forebears, Olympia Brown. I love the words she said. She was the first woman officially ordained by a denomination in this country in, I think, 1863. And her words speak true even today. She was a Universalist. Stand by this faith, work for it, and sacrifice for it. There is nothing in all the world so important as to be loyal to this faith, which has placed before us the loftiest ideals, which has comforted us in sorrow, strengthened us for noble duty, and made the world beautiful. Do not demand immediate results, but rejoice that we are worthy to be entrusted with this great message, that you are strong enough to work for a great, true principle without counting the cost. Go on finding ever new applications of these truths and new enjoyments in their contemplation, always trusting in the one God, which ever lives and loves. Let us now rise in body or spirit as we sing together hymn number 125. be seated. The ministry of our congregation is created by the gifts of time, talent, and monetary gifts that we share with one another in community. And so I invite you today, as you are willing and able, to share your monetary gifts for the welfare of this community. Thank you. Gifts given in love and hope continue a cycle of love and hope.
From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live.
It is the practice in our community to Spirit of life and love, we hold up today the wonder and mystery of life that touches us in so many different ways, touches us in ways that make our lives wondrous, and touches us with fear and trepidation, that touches us in our physical, spiritual, and emotional beings. We give thanks for this community which helps us support and sustain us through all that is our life. We hold up today the blessing of being in a community that pushes us to grow and learn from one another, that pushes us to be active participants in the transformation of the world as we work for peace and justice. We hold up today those who are suffering in mind, body, or spirit, that they may find healing and wholeness. And may we find ways to find peace and hope and love in our lives, in our community, and in our society. Blessed be. Amen. So thank you, Caleb, for being with us this morning to share some of your musings about your senior thesis and research on Octavia Butler's writing and Cormac McCarthy's writing. Their dystopian writings almost seem prescient in looking at what's happening in our society today, especially how many years ago was it that Butler died?
Oof, it was at least around 30, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Caleb has sparked an inner dialogue for me. And so he kindly agreed to do this dialogue service. And when I asked, okay, what should the title be? He said, Morality in the Apocalypse. I mean, is that the best title for a service ever? That topic pushes us to consider how our morality can be lived out as our society shifts and we feel less secure about living in our society. It pushes us to think about what threads do we want to hold on to keep some kind of sanity. I'm personally interested in Caleb's perspective because our generational worldviews are different, even though they let me go to the young adult group. And I have a lot to learn from Caleb. So I particularly appreciate you helping me. So in the last few years, many of us have felt like we live in a dystopian novel. Has anybody sort of felt that? Yeah, some of us. One poem in our hymnal, and I always encourage people dig into the readings in the back of the hymnal because they're incredible. And this particular reading really speaks to the reality of the world in which we live. And it's both a hard poem to read and to listen to because we feel the reality of the words. The poem is by Audre Lorde, the Black feminist lesbian poet, mother, warrior. She wrote poems with the brutal honesty she experienced in life. Harsh words we need to hear.
All right, I'm doing a little reading for y'all. So this is by Audre Lorde. It's called A Litany to Survival. For those of us who live at the edge of the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone. For those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of youth. For those of us who were imprinted with fear like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk. For by this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hoped to silence us. For all of us, this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive. And when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not remain. When the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise in the morning. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard, not welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive.
Thank you. That has a much richer impact today just because of everything that's happened in our society in the last few years.
Oh, yes.
You know, the reality of us understanding more deeply that people of color were not meant to survive.
Mhm. Yep.
So what was it that sparked your interest in this topic and these two authors in particular?
Right. Okay. So I am a senior in college and I'm in the honors program at my school, which means I have to do a senior thesis, which is kind of basically you can write about anything that you want. It should be something in your field. I study English, of course. So I was reading Octavia Butler for fun, The Parable of the Sower and The Parable of the Talents. And as I was reading her, I realized that she did something I had not seen a lot of other post-apocalyptic novels or authors do, in that she maintained that even in the apocalypse, societal structures and constructs like racism, homophobia, things like that would still remain even as the rules of society kind of shifted. So I was very interested because I'd never really heard that opinion before. I also knew from my research, even back then, that Octavia Butler was a very profound writer, and she laid the way for many other Black women writers in sci-fi. So I was already intrigued. And I had read The Road in high school and loved it. So I wanted to reread it, kind of go back and see how Cormac McCarthy, who is a white man, kind of deal with the same issues. And so originally I was planning on almost pitting them against each other and saying, oh, this is where Octavia Butler's work is better because it establishes how societal constructs remain in an apocalypse. But as I was reading The Road, I found that their messages tended to be a lot more similar than they were different. And while I think Octavia Butler is correct in that those societal structures will probably remain to some extent, I also appreciate Cormac McCarthy's view. So I started off kind of putting them together, and now I'm actually almost comparing them, and I focus specifically on the pilgrimages that the characters take as they travel through this apocalyptic landscape. So that's how it all began.
Wow. So can you talk a little bit more about Butler and McCarthy, since I haven't read The Road or any of his work?
Okay, so Octavia Butler first. She grew up very poor. Her mother was a maid to a white family, but her mom was adamant that Octavia would receive an education because she did not want Octavia to end up like her. They were so poor that in one of her interviews, she said that she got one pair of shoes a year and she wore those everywhere because that's all they had. That's all the money they had. Eventually, she ended up breaking into the sci-fi realm. She was really the only Black woman in the 1960s to be doing that. And to be fair, there were only 4 Black sci-fi authors to begin with that were well known. Samuel R. Delany is the other very well-known Black author. But so she had a very interesting take on it because in an interview, her interviewer asked her, why do you think no Black people had published before you, before Samuel R. Delany, before a couple of these other authors? And she said that people in especially minority groups tend to do what that minority group is already doing. And sci-fi wasn't something that they did. And she said that she was kind of actually out of the mold by going into sci-fi. And she said, I don't really care. I'm just going to go for it. And it worked out well. She has inspired many, many Black women in sci-fi and fantasy realms to continue writing and continue publishing, which I think is fantastic. And then the books that I looked at are The Parable of the Sower and The Parable of the Talents. And those mostly focus on a kind of what if situation of what if all of these societal issues we have just keep progressing and go towards their natural consequences. So you see a lot of capitalistic motives drawn to their end, homophobia, racism, sexism, climate change even. So this is, it's actually slightly terrifying because it's true to what's kind of happening now. And she wrote it in the 60s and 70s, so rather later than now, but that's kind of Octavia Butler for you. Cormac McCarthy he grew up in Appalachia in Tennessee, and he grew up poor by our standards. He lived a little better than his neighbors who were in like 1 or 2 room shacks. His family had a little more than that, but by no means rich in our view. And he had an interesting time at school. He was not a huge fan. He went to college. He dropped out and joined, I believe, the Air Force. And then once he was done with that, he went back to college, of which he once again dropped out. So suffice to say, he was not a huge fan of people telling him what to do and what to create. He was definitely an individual, and he knew what he wanted. And he is most well known for his gritty Westerns. I'd probably say that his most well-known book is All the Pretty Horses. Blood Meridian is another one, which is very violent. His books are known for kind of their sparse punctuation, sparse dialogue, often very gory, bloody characters. So he has quite an impact. And The Road, which I studied, is a little bit different for him. He almost always wrote like desert, Southwest, United States, or Mexico books, but The Road is the only post-apocalyptic novel. It is very much a gray, ashen wasteland, not much going on, and it focuses on two characters, which is also somewhat unique for him. Obviously, he would have his main character, but he was known for having a lot of characters kind of come in and out. So The Road was a big step away from what he was used to for him.
So you've talked about how different their lives were. What were some other like similarities and maybe some more significant literary differences that you found?
Right. Similarities, I think they are both they have strong personalities. Neither of them really did what they thought they should do. They did what they wanted to do. And that can be seen through Cormac McCarthy kind of coming in and out of college and all of that. And then with Octavia Butler breaking into sci-fi where Black women were excluded and Black people in general. So they both definitely kind of didn't care much about what other people thought or what they said. And they definitely took their own paths, which I think has turned out well for their literature and their fan bases. Other similarities, I think their prose style is actually pretty similar. I would say Cormac McCarthy's is just a little bit more, not advanced, but a little more theoretical almost. He learned kind of what writing entailed, and so he was able to break those rules a little more, I think, than Octavia Butler. But the most startling differences are probably their genres, because Octavia Butler wrote pretty much solely science fiction, and the Parable series is actually one of her least science fiction-y novels, I suppose. And Cormac McCarthy was very realistic fiction almost, except for The Road, which was post-apocalyptic. So literary genres were quite different. And then, of course, I think their identities as a white man and a Black woman were also very intrinsic in their works, because Octavia Butler focused a lot more on those social interactions and social cues and constructs and how those would look like in outer space or in the apocalypse, while Cormac McCarthy more so focused on matters of survival and almost matters of violence. So that's what I would say.
So how do you think that each of them dealt with morality?
Right. Okay. So who to start with? All right. So Lauren Olamina is the main character in the Parable series. I think she is the shining star of morality for these novels. She is very community focused. She wants to help others, even if there is no specific gain for herself, which in the context of an apocalypse, and especially one that is fueled and run by social constructs and capitalism and things like that, a lot of people don't understand, and they are quite reticent to that idea. But she also focuses on how to help the next generation, how to survive, which, for example, is seen when she has kind of a go bag, so that she's always ready to run. And in it, she has many different types of seeds, because she knows that eating off of the land is one of the only ways that people who don't have a lot of money, which is almost everyone at that point, will have to almost provide for themselves. So she is very practical, but she also recognizes that there needs to be a moral center, which is what her Earthseed religion is based around. And it's solely capitulated on the thought that God is change. She is a big believer that you can change your surroundings, but to be fair, that change also comes back and changes you. It's a very reciprocal process. And So she's always looking for ways to change the situation, or unfortunately, when she couldn't control things and the situation changed for her, how to kind of make the best out of that. And at the end of the day, that is what she preached, what she taught, while also holding on to the belief that humans can be good by their very nature. And they do not always have, it does not always have to be transactional. They don't always have to believe that they're getting something in order to help. So that, I say, would be Octavia Butler's take. For Cormac McCarthy, it's a much more bare bones kind of morality, because the road follows a father and a son just trying to make it to the coast of California, although the son doesn't know that because he grew up in the apocalypse. So it's them just almost wandering around trying to survive, and it's much more dangerous than Octavia Butler's, because we're not exactly sure what caused the apocalypse, but it's something more like nuclear holocaust or bombings or something like that, a little more sudden and drastic than the Parable series. So in that, the father has morals that he tries to teach to his son, but time and time again, he shows that his morals can be moved aside if it means protecting his son. So that is the father's take. He tries definitely to teach his code to the son and kind of teach this idealism that the world can be good. But when push comes to shove and he believes that there's even a little bit of danger that could come to the son, his morals simply go out the window. The son, on the other hand, because he's been taught kind of this moral code and he's been talked to a lot, he believes very strongly that he has to be a good guy. And there's a set of rules that kind of follow what constitutes a good guy. But at the end of the day, the main one that cannot be broken no matter what is cannibalism. Good guys do not eat other people, which you think is an easy rule. But in the apocalypse, it's not as easy. So the son and father starve many times instead of committing cannibalism, because this is kind of their last lifeline. And the son believes that if they cross this line, there will be almost no redemption possible, and they will not be better than the rest of the
Anybody
marauders.
else.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's a little more scary, I believe, in Cormac McCarthy's vision, but I think the son has a good grasp on morality, even in that.
So with Octavia Butler, it almost sounds like she's universalist, because she believes that, you can do good out of your ethics and morality rather than some fear of condemnation.
Right, for sure. She definitely wants to make a community, show people that even in these horrible circumstances, there is still good in people for no other reason than that we are human, which I think is very powerful. And then I think she specifically sets up a right-wing extremist Christian president, actually, which is funny, in her novels. And it kind of showcases how even in that, the main character still holds firm to her ethics, even though she knows that there is a danger of persecution or death and things like that because of this right-wing extremism. So yes, I think you could say she is a universalist.
Good. So where did you find hope in their writing? I mean, you think about apocalyptic novels and, is there any hope?
Right. I remember reading The Road in junior year of high school, and I thought that there was no hope in that book at all. But after reading it again and after researching, I really think the son comes to kind of embody hope. He is there to serve almost as the moral center. So when the father believes that something is okay because it will save his son still has that moral guide that says, I'm not sure we can recover from this if we partake in whatever it is. And I think also his hope comes from him being almost the image of the future. because his father many times is caught up on the past and his memories and what the world used to look like. And so it's very hard for him to kind of imagine a new world, a new social order, because all he's ever known was what was before and now in this apocalypse where he's focused on survival. So the father comes to very much represent the past and the present, which is rather bleak. And the son comes to embody hope for the future. And there are a couple lines in there that are heartbreaking, but also fair, that have somewhat to do with religion. And so one of the first lines in the novel is the father looking at the son and saying, "This is God's word," or "God never spoke," talking about his son. And so it's kind of relating how the father places his hope in his son. And he almost comes to represent like a salvific figure. Like if he can make it through, if he can survive, then there is hope that goodness can win out over the bad of the marauders and the cannibals and everyone like that. So I think it's pretty clear in the road that the son is hope. He's the future. He is also almost always morality. So that one's pretty straightforward, I think. In the parable series, I think it's much more hopeful. It talks about, hey, these are the natural consequences of these social constructs like capitalism and racism and homophobia. And this is how it affects people. And it's certainly not good. But as you follow Lauren Olamina, she comes to gather a group of people who you would not normally recognize as strong. For example, the first people that she picks up are a mother and a father and a little baby. And the people she's already traveling with are like, whoa, we're in an apocalypse. Like, we need people who can fight. And she says, if we cannot have these children, if we cannot have the responsibility and be able to protect these children, then there's no hope for us anyways. And so it comes to represent this kind of communal gathering, not only of safety, but also of growth, of education, of understanding that people can be good and are good even in the apocalypse, because a lot of times people have to do bad things because of this horrible context, but that is not at the end of the day what they are or what we are. And I think that's the hopeful center of the piece, is that humans are by nature good and they can be corrupted. Obviously not, there are bad people in the world, but to label everyone and almost write them off immediately as evil or as dangerous defeats the whole purpose of community and of love. So
She wasn't really into original sin.
no, she was not a huge fan. In fact, much of the book is in direct contrast to her father, who is a minister. And it's kind of along the lines of, she understands why he sticks to his faith, because it's kind of, as the father in the road, it's what he's known, it's what has gotten him through for this long. But she believes that as the times and the situation changes, so too does your theology need to change. And so she definitely fights back against a lot of his original sin, a lot of his evil, what is a sin and what isn't. She is definitely not as strict on that as her father.
So how can these books and their messages, I mean, I love the message of, everybody can enter into the community, everybody can be accepted.
Right.
And really in McCarthy, that foundation that yes, there's morality, but the deepest morality is love between the father and the son.
Right.
What are the lessons for us today?
I think first, with the parable series, I think a lot of it does just go back to community. I think it's important to note that in this community that she makes, the Earthseed community, she does allow people in who don't follow Earthseed, which is kind of her new religion. I would say more like a philosophy, but she lets people in, and there's a mutual respect there, which I think for my generation is a little harder to maintain. Our generation has kind of gone through a lot of polarizing ordeals already. And the oldest of us are in our like mid-20s. So it's been a rough time. But I think having that respect to an extent, everyone has their limits. And I don't think that we should let any opinion just go without fighting it or just shutting it down. But I think having a mutual respect for people is good, especially for my generation, because a lot of times we just write people off based off of just a couple things that we know about them, especially surface level things, lots of politics that's being done with, which again, I understand because some of these takes are definitely not good. But I think having that mutual respect just helps realize that at the end of the day, we are all human, and hopefully we are all coming from kind of that baseline of love, and we might interpret that in different ways. But at the end of the day, we are doing what we believe in because of love. And that's the main point I think that Octavia Butler wants to make. Obviously, she does that. She shows it in a community filled with many Black and brown people, because those books take place in California, where there is a large population of those people. So I think that she wanted to show that, while also recognizing that you have to be flexible in what you believe while holding to those core ethics. So as in, you might have to change based on the situation, whether it's, the apocalypse, like in her novels, or whether it's, the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And it's something that I didn't think would happen, but you have to be flexible in that. And you have to kind of see the reality and understand that it's not over yet. We have to keep fighting, or else there's no point in our ethics and what we do. And a lot of times I believe, again, in my generation, we hold to very rigid, almost beliefs. And it's sometimes hard, even for me, to be flexible and to hear other opinions that kind of align with mine or kind of don't. It's hard sometimes to hear that and to recognize that change is a necessary part and function of life. And without that, you might almost be stranded. So Cormac McCarthy, on the other hand, I think the lessons of love, as you said, are also important to note, because I think the father and son love each other. And as I said, they interpret that in different ways, because the father interprets his love for the son as, my love is more powerful than my morals, and I will do whatever it takes so that my son survives. And the son, on the other hand, is almost the complete opposite. And he says, I love my father so much that I don't want him to be destroyed by what he thinks will save me. And so it's almost like the physical aspect of love with the father, and then the son's spiritual, emotional love, where he says, my father might survive based off what he does, but if I don't help him with his morals and keep him as a good guy, then I will lose him he will lose his soul. And I think that that's very meaningful and impactful. I think a lot of times that's what happens with us. We have different ways that we look at love. I'm a much more emotional love person than a physical. And I think that it's been interesting to kind of talk with my friends through this as I was preparing for this, and kind of realizing that we do sometimes have different opinions of what love looks like, how to interpret love, how our political beliefs, how our religious beliefs reflect what we hold at our cores. So I think, again, it's kind of that lesson of love can look very different for different people. And so the bedrock we should remember is love, but up more in how we interpret it is where some of that change might have to come in.
Because I know yesterday we were talking some about the difference in generations and where you see different religious stories like the Exodus. Moses could not go into the promised land. It's like the older generations have to release what they taught to the younger generations and trust that younger generations have learned what they need to go forward into the future. I mean, Gibran talks about that as, our children being arrows that we shoot into the future.
Right. And we were talking about the road because the father's real downfall and why we compared him to Moses yesterday is because he is so stuck in the past and the present that he is physically unable to picture any sort of future except for his son, which is why he fights so hard for him. But this means that, like Moses, he's almost left in the wilderness while his son gets to go to the promised land. And he is left behind because he is so stuck in that past and in those memories. And so it's a helpful reminder to say that not only, obviously, we can't escape our memories. And there is, I believe, a point when it's okay to kind of relinquish control to the next generation while also still obviously guiding them because we need help. But recognizing that your memories may limit you from seeing what the future can look like.
And of course, Butler's most profound statement too is, as you've talked about, is the importance of community.
Right.
Well, and McCarthy talks about that at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's interesting, their take on community. I think I talked enough about the parable series because she kind of just collects people as she goes. And they're all very respectful. They're very mindful of what they learn and of each other. Cormac McCarthy's, I think, is more interesting because the community is basically just the father and son, which a community can be just two people. And it's clear that they love each other throughout the entire book. But what I think is most interesting is at the very end, the son finds a new community. He finds 4 people who kind of were just wandering by. And his father doesn't get that community. And throughout the novel, there's this huge push from the son to let other people in to their little duo. And the father, time and time again, says no, because he believes that there is a danger posed to the child. It's almost the thought of, there's a good chance that this person could be harmless, but also I will not take even the most minuscule risk if it means endangering my son. And the son is much more understanding, and he knows that without a community, and I believe almost by definition, a community has to grow or has to be outward focused. The son realizes that without that community, they will not perpetuate their morals, which means that there is no possibility of other good guys existing. And so there's once again that disconnect between the pair, which is why the son is kind of able to go and meet that new community. And unfortunately, the father is not.
And then, of course, Butler's character talks about the importance of community. And that really relates for me to what we're doing together here, because there's so many people who are isolated, like the father and the son. And then, the son realizes for him to survive emotionally, probably, that there needs to be a community. So how, our message out of all of these, part of it is, how do we create a community where people can see us as a lifeline, sort of, for the future?
Right. I think Octavia Butler places a very large emphasis on inclusivity, which I think goes back to the fact that she is a Black woman writing in sci-fi. But she makes sure time and time again to remind the audience that this group is very diverse. There's many different races, many different languages spoken, different ethnicities, things like that. And so she's very clear that this community cannot be basically a bunch of people who are mirror copies of themselves. That is not conducive to growth or understanding. And it takes kind of that diversity, that inclusivity, to be able to grow, because you realize just how small your own world is. And she definitely stresses that aspect of it. She also stresses that mutual respect, which I think almost is a necessary component of diversity, because you probably will not have heard of some of the things that people who aren't in your ethnic group or race talk about. And you have to realize that their lived experience deserves as much respect as yours does. And that can be a hard thing sometimes, but having that mutual respect and that love definitely helps realize that community and makes them feel honestly more like a family than just a community. They are very close knit.
Well, that actually reminds me of a poem that we talked about, that struggling with the world, but the mutual respect. And I think we're going to share this poem. And since we talked a good period of time, maybe not do the closing hymn, so we won't keep you here all afternoon. This poem is by the UU theologian Tandeka, and it also is in the hymnal. And it's one that is quite powerful for living in the world in its reality today. She writes, "Despair is my private pain, born from what I've failed to say, failed to do, failed to overcome. Be still, my inner self. Let me rise to you. Let me reach down into your pain and soothe you. I turn to you to renew my life. I turn to the world, to the streets of the city, the worn out tapestries of brokerage firms, drug dealers, private estates, personal things in the bag lady's cart, rage and pain in the faces that turn from me, afraid of their own inner worlds. This common world I love anew as the lifeblood of generations who refuse to surrender their humanity in an inhumane world courses through my veins. From within this world, my despair is transformed to hope, and I begin anew the legacy of caring." So as we extinguish the chalice, the flame of our chalice, I'm not going to fall down the steps. We share these words. We're just going to have a fun day all day today. That was a new experience too. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And our closing words are from Octavia Butler. These are like Caleb's mantras. All that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. And another short quote, there is no end to what a living world will demand of you. There is no end to what a living world will demand of you. And after the postlude, we're going to have a little Q&A from down here so we can see the folks on Zoom. Thank you. So I'm wondering if there are any folks who have questions, comments, thoughts for Caleb. Think up, and I can't see everybody on Zoom, so you're just gonna have to shout out if you have a thought or a comment.
Gary, it's McCarthy.
Yes,
And I just, thank you, Caleb. That was just amazing and so interesting and inspires me to read those books that you've talked about. I also wanted to let folks know that our own Unitarian Universalist publishing house, affiliated publishing house, Beacon Press, was the publisher of Octavia Butler's first novel, Kindred. And so and now it makes ultimate sense. I'm sure when they got that manuscript, it was like, oh yes, we're going to do this. So just that was a little UU connection there. But I'd love to maybe we could do a book study using Octavia Butler's books.
and some people may not know that we actually have a publishing house, and our history has been publishing novels and nonfiction that are by minority authors and that deal with issues in our society that are controversial, to say the least. So Beacon Press, it's something we can all be proud of.
Yep.
Yep. And they're on Kindle too. Shannon. Okay, here, I'll go.
Oh, okay.
I guess I'll stay up here. Or
Okay,
should I go back?
I
Okay.
have to get my.
Anyways,
Too.
okay. Caleb, first of all, that was amazing. You're so well-spoken and intelligent. I thought that was really good. I was wondering, actually Miles was wondering, but he's all the way back there, so I'm asking for him. Which story do you think is more realistic or a better prediction of our future?
Oh, that's a hard one. I didn't think of that would go Shannon and Miles. Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry, that was on me. I would definitely say that unless something very drastic happens, I think Octavia Butler's vision is much more realistic to happen. And in fact, if you read her novels, a lot of what she talks about is kind of already happening, because she was writing this as if these societal issues would continue, which they have. So I'd say we're about like halfway between when she was writing that and what happens in the novels. But I have heard before, I'm sure y'all have seen like the things with Roe v. Wade, where it's like, oh, the Handmaid's Tale is coming true. And people have kind of been fighting back against that, which I think is accurate. So if you're looking for something, I believe, a little more realistic and a little more honest, I think that the parable of the sower and talents is unfortunately very accurate.
Well, and I think it's so interesting that she focuses on community, because it's really hard to survive in the world in isolation.
Oh yeah, for sure.
When I first started reading the parable of the sower, I haven't finished it yet. You know, I felt like I was reading the Hunger Games.
Yep.
And I think the author of the Hunger Games was really trying to write something that would speak to what's happening in the world. Oh, Joan. Yes,
Oh.
here.
All right.
I'm falling down on my job.
First of all, in the chat, Milda says, fantastic presentation. So I have read pieces of both books, but realized and got some advice that I couldn't handle it, and that was accurate. But I made it through the first chapter of the parable of the sower, and some things that I remember are that they have like fences keeping them in. So that idea that she's building a community was really interesting because it starts with those fences. And I remember I quit when she drives by the child.
Yep.
I was like, okay, I'm done. I can't do this. But I remember her seeing that child and wanting to help. And that being a person who was outside the community. So that was not okay to do because of the risk. So I'm wondering, does Octavia Butler have like more things to say about that? Like with, as people get welcomed into the community, does that stuff still happen within the community, and how do they deal with that? Does she talk about that at all?
Yes. So I think Octavia Butler, first and foremost, when the story begins, the main character lives with her family in a walled community. And I think that just shows kind of how people stick to what they know, because their parents kind of know what's going on. But Lauren Olamina from the very beginning knows that those walls someday are going to fall because there are lots of poor people outside who want to get at what they have inside, which is another kind of just us versus them dichotomy. But in the community she creates, there are not a ton of issues. They are very clear that they will not put up with it. The main character is anyways. And they do like kick out people who kind of, I don't know, do those things. I can't honestly remember any specific circumstance, but it's very clear that it's kind of like when they enter in, she tells them, hey, here are rules. If you can abide to those, come on in. And if you can't, then you're either don't come in, or if you come in and you break those rules, there will be consequences, and they will be fast and harsh, because Lauren believes that any kind of weakness within the community just has the tendency to break all of it apart. So, yep.
Well, and I think what's interesting about that is there have to be boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we say that we accept everyone, but there still have to be boundaries in terms of how we treat one another.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, it's people excluding themselves.
Right. Yeah.
Terry,
Yes.
this is Dick Bain.
Hi, Dick.
Yes, hi. I was wondering what the role of religion was in these post-apocalyptic scenarios as compared to the role of religion today in our scenario.
So how it relates to today?
Like what the rule of religion was after the apocalypse compared to today.
Okay. So for the parable series, religion, Lauren Olamina is very hesitant to call her philosophy Earthseed a religion. But she does, at the end of the day, call it that because she thinks it's the easiest way to almost disseminate this very community-focused philosophy. And she believes that it's easier to accept some of the things that she says if it's under the purview of religion, because it's kind of like, oh, religion, there's some mystery there. There's some, unexplainable things. And in The Road, which is a fascinating part of the novel that I didn't get to talk about, but, if you ever want to chat me up, please do. The father kind of sees religion only so far as it serves him. So he still believes in a Christian God, but he pretty much only uses that concept to be upset and almost to rail against him and be like, if you are such a good God, why would you let this happen? And so I think religion for him was more so just a way to justify his feelings and say, I'm upset, I'm angry. I mean, it's just me and my son, so there's really no one to be angry at. So then he kind of relies upon this construction of God in order to keep going.
A lot of us do that today.
Yep. No, I'm not saying he's wrong.
Yeah. So you were also saying that Butler talks about the official religion as being very Christian and right wing.
Yep. Yes. So kind of the people in control are actually, it's very reminiscent of 2020, because this right-wing extremist president is very much like, hey, I'm going to bring America back to what it used to be. And I'm going to make this good. Actually, the phrase was make America great again, which is funny because it was in the 1960s. Anyways, but so it's a very drastic change. And she is not the only one who's kind of created her own religion or philosophy. And at the beginning of the second novel, these right-wing extremists like break down their doors and like almost enslave them. And so it's very much like Christianity in those novels is used as a means to create cohesion, but that basically means eliminating anyone that isn't a Christian.
Prescient.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? I know that some of y'all on Zoom might be able to talk better if we turn the microphones off in here and the sound won't bounce around as much. So if people want to have lunch after the service to continue conversation or different conversations, come up to the front after the service. And if some of y'all want to meet us someplace, text me and I'll tell you where we're going. How about that? So thank y'all, and thank you, Caleb.
Thank you.
This is, yeah, we'll give you a passing grade.
Okay, that means a lot. If you could tell my professors that, it'd be
Yeah, I'll tell
perfect.
your professor
Okay,
that.
good.